Thank you again for coming. Please turn to Titus chapter 1 as we've discussed the message that Paul is writing to the young evangelist Titus, discussing various principles about teaching for various individuals in the congregation and the need for sound doctrine, moral purity, and so on. In the first chapter, we've been emphasizing the qualifications in the work of elders. And so we've discussed the terms the Bible uses to refer to them. They're called bishops or elders or pastors, different terms for the same work. We've discussed the work that they do. The example that they're to set: they watch for the members' souls, they teach the truth and rebuke error, and they oversee, rule, lead the local congregation. And so we have emphasized the qualifications as we've been reading them. So let's go ahead and read them again before we proceed. Let's go ahead and read them, Titus chapter 1 and verse 6 through 9 again, please. Who'd like to read Titus chapter 1, verse 6 through 9 for us, please? Bill, Titus 1, verses 6 through 9.
If a man is blameless, his husband of one wife, having faithful children, not accursed of dissipation or insubordination. For a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but hospitable, a lover of what is good, sober-minded, just, holy, self-controlled, holding fast in faithful word, as he had been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convict those who contradict.
Okay, so based on the qualifications and the fact that herein in 1 Timothy chapter 3, it says that a bishop must be the things that are described here. Men are appointed. It says if a man is the things that are here. So we concluded that these are necessary qualifications, that they're all necessary, and each man to be appointed as an elder must have all these qualifications and must be qualified when he's appointed, must continue to be qualified, can't add man-made rules to the qualifications. And the purpose of these qualifications, as we call them, is to select men that can adequately do the job that God wants them to do. If we don't have the evidence, then that's reason not to appoint. And some of the qualities we talked about are absolute, others are matters of degree. It takes time to develop them. And so these are all principles that we have tried to emphasize as we looked at these various qualifications. Now, in particular, last time I made the point that as we look at some of them in particular that may be more controversial, it's important, I think, to get the foundation first before we start looking into difficult areas. Specifically, we need to make sure that we know what the words mean, and we need to study other passages that relate to those terms so that we have a basis to operate as we discuss applications. And then maybe to look at the applications that may be more obvious before we go into the ones that are more difficult. So I want to encourage you to remember that as we proceed, especially this evening as we look at the family qualifications. Let's get the terms down and other passages, then we can make applications. That's what we've been doing. We talked about blameless a good bit already, and then last time we discussed the husband of one wife. So we laid the foundation already on this one last week. So what are some things we learned, some applications we learned last week about the husband of one wife? What are some things we can understand from that qualification, what's required of a man in order to be appointed as an elder or to serve as an elder?
Be a man.
All right, first of all, he has to be a man. A woman can't qualify as the husband of one wife. Okay, so first of all, he's a man of one woman, which means he has to be a man, a male. Okay, what else? Rick?
Married.
Okay, he has to be married, not a bachelor. And what, is that what you were going to say, Rick?
He has to be married to a believing wife that is in the home.
Okay, that's a qualification that we talked about in 1 Timothy chapter 3, wasn't it? That she has to be faithful. Okay. And anything else that we talked about or learned about the husband and one wife? Debbie?
You can't have more than one wife.
All right, can't be a polygamist. And
Or divorced.
it can't be unscripturally married, divorced, remarried. All right, so all of those things should be clear from the idea of being the husband of one wife. So that's where we were at the end of class last time, and then we carried over a question that we were going to discuss after we laid the foundation And Steve asked it last week. So what was your question, Steve? What was the other question you wanted us to talk about tonight?
If a man's wife dies, he still qualifies as an elder.
Okay. So assuming a man is qualified, he's appointed as an elder, and his wife dies. What then? All right, you've all had a week to think about it. So I'm sure you all have the answers to the question. So what is your answer? If a man, his wife dies, does he continue as an elder, or does he step down? What does the scripture say? Karen.
It's one of the qualifications, like all the others, and if he stops having that qualification, then he's not qualified, just like if he stopped having being not getting to wine or something, he wouldn't be qualified.
All right, so one of the points we made was that he must continue to have the qualifications. It's not just when he's appointed, he must continue to have it because he must be. He must be these things. If a man is these things, then he serves. He must be these things. If he loses the qualifications, then he should no longer serve. And so if that applies then to the husband of one wife, if his wife dies, he no longer is the husband of one wife. That's one viewpoint. Other comments? Rick?
The church is diagrammed the same as what a family is at the house, with Christ being the head and the church being his bride, and the different members having all their parts, but they have to be faithful and true, righteous parts that they continue with. So if the elder is to lose his wife, nothing there that makes any exception for that. There's nowhere in the Bible that makes an exception and says, well, you can still be an elder, though you don't fit the criteria. But at the same time, you still know to carry on and be a believing Christian and still do what you can do for the congregation.
Okay, I think there's no question about that, that the fact that a man or a woman, their spouse dies, is no reason for them to not serve God faithfully. We discussed the fact that an elder has special qualifications. If he loses those qualifications, that doesn't mean he's necessarily a bad man. Doesn't necessarily mean he's not a faithful Christian. But if he loses the qualification, he can't serve as an elder anymore. Other discussion or comments? Anybody? All right, let me give one more point to consider. The passage says, if a man is blameless the husband of one wife, in 1 Timothy 3, he must be the husband of one wife. In Romans chapter 7, if you look at that with me, please. Romans chapter 7. Paul discusses what happens when a spouse dies. Who would like to read for us, please, Romans chapter 7, verses 2 and 3? So read Romans 7, verses 2 and 3 for us, please. Bill, please, Romans 7, verses 2 and 3.
For the woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. So then, if while her husband lives, she marries another man, she will be called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she has married another man.
All right, now this is spoken from the standpoint of the woman, but of course the same would be true of a man. How long is a woman bound to her husband? As long as he lives. What happens when he dies?
She's
Right.
freed from that law of the husband that has passed away.
So she's free from the law. So now it says that she could marry another man because she's free from the first husband. All right? I put that together with Titus chapter 1 and 1 Timothy chapter 1. An elder must be the husband of one wife. Romans 7, if his wife dies, he's no longer the husband of one wife. That's what the passage says as far as I can see. And that's the conclusion that I have to reach for myself. Susie?
Well, I was just thinking that, if the same man, everything being equal, if his wife had died, he would not be appointed, he could not be appointed as an elder. Therefore, if he didn't qualify, then he loses his qualification when she dies. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah, I thought about that too, that if his wife had already died before he was appointed, most congregations wouldn't appoint him. I don't think we would. So if that's so, then he's lost his qualifications. If he's lost, so it would be the same afterwards if he lost his wife afterwards. Those are the other thoughts to consider. Anybody else anything else to add? All right, let's just hope it doesn't happen, okay? Anything else on that? All right, let's move on then to the next qualification. Having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. So on question number 35 now in the questions, we want to define our terms, lay the foundation. We're going to define our terms, and then we will make applications and hold the more difficult applications, I hope, towards the end. So let's define our terms. First of all, faithful. So I ask you, what does the word faithful mean, and how do you know, and what are some passages that help us to know what the word faithful means? How do you know what the word faithful means? Scripture? Discussion? How do you know? Frank?
In the American or English Standard Version, it says the children are believers.
All right. So the translations that we're looking at, well, that's probably too, well, that's okay. Some say believers, or that they believe. I've listed some on the chart for you there. So some translations say that children must be faithful. Some say they must be believers, or they must believe. Okay? Other comments or discussion on the meaning of the word faithful? Rick?
Well, you can be faithful to anything, really. But what it takes to be faithful is to have a true belief. And to be faithful to God, you have to believe that God is, that Christ is, and that all of God's scriptures are true, and that you believe in every single one.
Okay. And I think that raises the point that we need to discuss and think about. Faithful to whom? Some people would say, well, just faithful to his father. Children have to be faithful to their father. As long as they're faithful to the father, and some people say it qualifies. Rick's point is the faithfulness here is faithfulness to God. So we need to discuss that, and that's why I gave you some scriptures, and there's lots of scriptures we can look at about the word, the term. But other comments or discussion on it? Susie?
Well, regarding that, in Acts 16, Lydia says that if you've judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come home and eat with me. But then also in Ephesians 1, Paul addresses the saints who are at Ephesus, but then he also calls them faithful in Christ Jesus.
Right. Okay. Other comments, other definitions, other passages? Now, if you look at the chart, I have some others that are similar. 1 Timothy 6 talks about believing masters, the servants who serve believing masters. What it's talking about. What does that mean? Or Revelation 2, be thou faithful unto death. What does that mean? 1 Timothy 3:11, the elders and deacons' wives must be faithful in all things. And that passage is especially helpful to me when God said that the wives of the elders and deacons must be faithful. Now he says the children must be faithful. Wouldn't it mean the same thing? It seems to me like it would be the same thing. And you can study this word faithful, and I'd be glad to discuss it further or give you other information if you want. But as far as I can tell, every passage that uses the word faithful, when it's talking about, now there's passages talking about God being faithful and Jesus and the scriptures and so on, but when it talks about people being faithful, it's always talking about faithfulness to God. It's talking about faithfulness to a man. The only possible exceptions would be in some of the parables you have of Jesus where a servant was faithful to his master, but even that is an illustration of our faithfulness to God. So the application is always faithful to God. So they are believers, the term implies, as far as I can tell, who are serving God faithfully. Okay, so just like the wives must be faithful, the children must be faithful, if that's a proper understanding of the terms. Other comments or discussion on the terms? Faithful, Frank.
To believe God's word and to be faithful to God, then we must be obedient to his word, obedient to follow his commandments, follow the law that's given to us in the scriptures that we have.
Okay, and so faithfulness is not just that you have at one time or another become part of the Lord's church or been baptized once. We're talking about living a faithful life. We're talking about being obedient in service to God. Okay? Other comments on the word? Okay. Let's see, where are we now? Okay, that's question 36. We had 37, we already covered 37. The fact that it's faithful would require being a believer, a Christian, and faithful to God. Okay? Let's look at the other terms before we discuss and make applications. The New King James then says, not accused of dissipation or insubordination. The Old King James says, riot or unruly. So let's define those terms. And now we're on question number 38. Riot or unruly. Let's define those terms. First of all, some other translations. We have other translations. Let's start with riot. Anybody have any other translation for the word riot or dissipation? Susan, Terry.
Immoral or rebellious, the AMP.
Immoral or, okay. So it's, for riot or dissipation, it's immoral. And for unruly, it was rebellious. Okay, let's take the first one, riot or dissipation. So here you have another translation that it's also translated immoral. Okay, and that was the English Standard you had?
It's the AMP.
Okay. Other translations or comments on riot, the word riot or dissipation? Susie.
Well, the NIV says being wild. The English Standard says debauchery, not a word we use often. And the New American Standard says indecent behavior.
Indecent behavior, okay. All right. So all of these words help us then, I think, to understand the definition, the meaning of that word, riot. And I gave you some scriptures, but anybody want to comment on those scriptures? This question number 39, or other scriptures about this word, use of this word, riot or dissipation. Terry.
Ephesians 5 uses the idea of drunkenness. And 1 Peter 4 is drunkenness again. The idea of drunkenness.
Okay. Okay, so drunkenness leads to rioting, Ephesians 5:18, 1 Peter 4:4. Not only drunkenness, but it also, you can see on the chart there, refers to lasciviousness in that context, lust, and carousing, idolatry, and so on. All of those would be examples of riot or dissipation, according to the meaning of that word. Also, Luke 15, the prodigal son gave his life in riotous living. Okay, so that gives us an idea of, so you have a child who would do those things, would be immoral or indecent in these, any of those things would be examples of it. Other comments on riot or dissipation? Frank, is your hand up?
Yes, and trying to figure out these initials. The RSV, the Revised Standard Version, it says loose living, or the NEB, New English Bible, is reckless living.
Okay. loose living, reckless living. All right? So it seems to me the basic idea of it is disobedience to God's moral, we would say immoral, living an immoral life. A life that's disobeying God's moral laws. Okay? Other comments on the idea of riot or dissipation? Terry?
None of those things fall in line with holy living or godly living. So they're living against God.
Okay. Yeah, so it's steadily ungodly. And again, the emphasis is on the relationship with God and His teaching. Okay? Debbie?
Well, they're just out of control. They're under nobody's control but their own, and that leaves God out completely.
I think that's especially more the next term, which is the unruly or insubordinate. And so let's look at that. What translations did you find for the word unruly or insubordinate? And now we're on question number 40. Question number 40, unruly or insubordinate. Susie?
Rebellious.
What was it?
Rebellious.
Rebellious. Okay. And that translation is the New American Standard and several others translate it that way. Other definitions? Frank?
Will not recognize authority, lawless, disobedient.
Okay. And we have some examples. In fact, right here in Titus chapter 1, we have an example of it in verse 10, where it says, there are many insubordinate, idle talkers, deceivers, especially those of the circumcision. So right here in the context, we have an example of what these false teachers are insubordinate. They are rebellious against God. And 1 Timothy chapter 1, when we studied 1 Timothy, listed various examples of this kind of insubordinate living, ungodly living, and Terry's point, ungodly, lawless, anything contrary to sound doctrine. So it seems to me that what we have here is with the word riot or dissipation is what we would think of as immoral, not obeying God's moral laws, and dissipation or unruly would emphasize just simply rebelling against God's laws. Would include any of God's laws that this woman just rebel against. Okay? So then if a man has children like that, he's not qualified. Okay? What he must have to qualify is faithful children. And these are specific ways then of being unfaithful. Other comments or discussion on the terms and the meaning? Applications. All right, let me see where we are here now. All right, and I'd like to point out, as I already have, that specifically it also applies in 1 Timothy 3, the elders' wives are to be faithful. And to me that helps me to understand what it means for the children of the elder. If a man's wife is living in immorality, if she's not living as a faithful Christian, if she's rebellious, then obviously she's not a faithful Christian. Same would be true for his children. His children and his wife are to be faithful to God. And specifically it says, it helps us to understand when it says that they're not to be accused of dissipation or insubordination, riot, or unruly. Okay, other comments on the terms? Terry?
This would automatically include a child's obedience to his father.
That would be included, wouldn't it? Obviously, a child who is stubbornly disobedient to his parents is not obeying God. The terms refer to obedience to God, but that's one way they could be disobedient to God, would be by disobeying their father and rebelling against him. Other comments on the terms? Okay, so some examples and applications that we need to make. First of all, question number 41. How many children? Of the children that a man has, how many have to be faithful, not accused of riot or unruly? This applies to how many of his children? Susie?
All of them.
Okay. Why do you say that? I'm not arguing with you. Why do you say that?
Because it says
His children must be.
All right, that's the normal application of the meaning of the terms, isn't it? His children must be. So if he has children, they must be faithful, and none of them can be guilty of riot or unruly. This must apply to all of them. Okay? Other comments or answers, discussion to the question, how many of his children? All right, I've got some applications that may help us to see the point. 1 Timothy 5 and verse 10. A widow who is qualified to be cared for must have brought up children. How many of her children must she have brought up? All of them, right? Talking about all of them. Or 1 Timothy 3 and verse 4, the elder must have his children in subjection. How many must be in subjection? Wouldn't that be all of them? And the wives of the elders and deacons must be grave, temperate, faithful in all things. How many of the wives? If you've got several deacons and several elders and several of the wives who are faithful and temperate and so on, but some are not, have we met the qualification? Are we doing what the passage says? Or does it not mean all of them? What do you mean all of them? Well, all those passages that seem to me help us to understand, at least they help me, to understand Titus 1 and verse 6. Then the children are to be, all of the children, however many he's got, that's how many, are to be not accused of riot or unruly. They're to be faithful. Okay? Other comments on how many of his children? Okay, and for me personally, and I don't know how much this helps other people, but for me, it helps to emphasize that idea of not accused of riot or unruly. It's easy, it seems to me when we discuss the subject, we emphasize the faith. He's got faithful children, or he doesn't have faithful children. But we don't often seem to be talking about the not accused of riot or unruly. To me, if he's got one child who's guilty of riot or unruly, that would eliminate it. So that helps me understand it. I hope it helps you too. So my conclusion is the elders' children must be Christians, must all be Christians, faithful to God, not accused of disobeying God or his moral laws. To me, that's what it's saying. Other comments on the definitions and the significance of the terms, looking at the other passages. Right.
So does this indicate that he must have more than one child?
Okay, so we ready to get to the tough questions now? Okay. Well, we got several tough questions. I guess we can go ahead and talk about that one now. What if a man has only one child? Let me see where I am in my notes here. Yeah, okay. All right. What's the answer, folks? He's got only one child, and the child will say is faithful, Christian, not accused of riot or unruly. Everything's fine except there's only one. But the passage says children, plural. So, can he qualify or not? What's the answer? Debbie's got the answer.
Children is always plural, more than one. One child is not plural.
All right, that's one view. Children is plural, so he has to have more than one. Sounds like on the surface of it at least, a reasonable approach. Other comments? Rick?
In 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 4, says, one who rules his own house, having his children in submission with all reverence.
Okay, so we've got another plural of children with regard to the elders, don't we? That even when they're still home in his house, he's having his children in subjection, which again is plural. Frank?
But going back to the example of 1 Timothy 5:10, if the widow indeed has brought up children, is she disqualified if she only has one?
I thought somebody might come up with that one. There's an answer to that one, but I want to listen to what you have to say. Anybody else have any comments? We'll talk about 1 Timothy 5 in just a few minutes, maybe. I hope. Terry?
Well, when we look back at Abraham in Genesis chapter 21, God uses the term children to describe the number of children that Sarah nursed. It says, and she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children?
But she had only one.
Yes, and she had only one.
Okay? Let me find my notes here. Other comments? Comment.
The other references that are given in the study book here, the children could be one or more in the different references. It doesn't specify, except the one in Genesis.
I'm sorry, Velma, you're going to have to speak up for me tonight. I'm sorry. Could you say that again, please?
The references given here for us in the book, the other ones do not exactly specify whether it's one or more child. But in Genesis, it specifies that she had one child.
Okay.
And still use the same term in both places.
Okay. Other comments? I'm letting you talk. I've got some things to say, but I'm letting you folks say what you have to say before I have my say. Other comments? All right. Well, here's the thing with me. First of all, as Debbie pointed out, the natural meaning of the word children would be plural. But there's another thing about that concerns me, and that is that when we talked about how many elders a church must have, we said, well, plural, 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 plural. So the church must have more than one. And it wouldn't be right to have just one, because the passages are plural. Why don't we reason the same way on the children of the elder? Plural, plural. However, let me go ahead and answer some of the other points that have been brought up. Let me go there some. All right, 1 Timothy 5 and verse 10. I appreciate the point. However, the language that's used there, you wouldn't notice it necessarily just looking in the English, but this is actually a compound word, which is neither plural nor singular. To translate it into English, they said children, but the original is a verb that doesn't have a number one way or another. So that one is, to me, not convincing. And the same is true for some of the others. And with Genesis chapter 21, that one's more convincing to me, but I still have some questions about it. But because we're almost out of time, I want to give you some that I think are convincing. These are ones that I just, for as far as I can see, the singular includes, the plural includes the singular. Same point that Frank made, but on 1 Timothy 5 and verse 4. If any widow has children that believe, they should relieve her. Well, if she only has one child? Plural includes the singular, right? Mark 10:29. No one who's left house or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or lands for my sake and so on, receive eternal reward. And so, well, what if he leaves just one sister or one brother or one child? Doesn't he still receive the reward? Plural includes the singular as far as I can tell. And 1 Timothy 5:16, back to the widows again. If any believing man or woman has widows, plural, let them relieve them. What if they have only one widow? Plural includes the singular. Romans 16:17. By the way, most of these I found myself. Some of the articles and stuff I've read from brethren don't make some of these points, but they seem valid to me. Note those who cause divisions and offenses, according to the doctrine, avoid them. What if they cause just one division? Plural includes the singular. Avoid foolish controversy and strivings and disputes about the law. What if it's just one foolish controversy or one dispute about the law? Doesn't plural include the singular? For myself, I honestly have to say, if it was me, if I was under consideration, I'd have to have more than one child to feel that I was qualified. I couldn't accept the concept of just one child because of the plural. But because of these kinds of things, neither could I cause strife in a congregation over it, or cause division in a congregation over it. To me, it's not a settled matter. I'll leave it for you to think about. But these verses seem to me to indicate that it certainly could mean that, but the fact that it could mean it doesn't mean it does. Sometimes the plural includes the singular, but it doesn't mean it does here in Titus chapter 1. Okay? Other comments before we close? All right. Well, thank you. It's not an easy subject we're talking about, but I appreciate your participation. Thank you.